What happens when a media-savvy royal meets a journalist who refuses to play by palace rules? Last night, viewers found out. When Meghan Markle sat down with Tamron Hall, she expected a friendly chat about her latest humanitarian ventures. What she got instead was a masterclass in investigative interviewing, one that peeled back layers of media polish and exposed the raw tension beneath. The result? A televised confrontation so charged that it left both the studio and social media in stunned silence. Before we dive into what happened, make sure to hit that subscribe button and drop a comment, because you're not going to believe how fast this seemingly ordinary interview spiraled into one of the most explosive television moments of the year, and the tension was palpable from the moment Meghan Markle stepped onto the Tamron Hall show set. Dressed in a cream blazer that shimmered beneath the studio lights, she radiated her signature poise, all grace, control, and quiet confidence. But beneath that polished surface, there was a hint of unease. The stiffness in her shoulders, the measured way she adjusted her cuff, small tells that even the cameras could sense. Across from her sat Tamron Hall, calm, razor-sharp, and ready. A thick stack of notes rested on her desk, a clear sign that this was no softball segment. "Meghan, thank you for being here tonight." Tamron began, her voice smooth but edged with authority. "I know you're here to talk about your new partnership with several charitable organizations, but I think our viewers would appreciate some context regarding your recent comments about media accountability." Meghan's smile flickered, just for an instant, before returning, perfectly composed. "Of course, Tamron," she said warmly. "I'm always happy to discuss the importance of truthful storytelling and supporting communities in need, but Tamron wasn't about to let the conversation drift into safe territory. I'm referring," she said, leaning forward slightly, "to your remarks last month about journalists needing to tell complete stories. Some interpreted that as criticism of the coverage you've received over the past few years. Can you clarify what you meant by that?" The question hung in the air like smoke after a gunshot. Meghan's posture stiffened. Her hands, perfectly folded moments ago, shifted to fidget with her wedding ring. "Context matters," she replied, voice steady but tight. "When stories are told without the full context, they can misrepresent situations and harm the people involved." Tamron nodded slowly, then countered, her tone polite but surgical. "That's interesting, because when I reviewed the coverage you're referencing, much of it was based on court filings, public records, and statements from your own representatives. Are you suggesting that factual reporting constitutes unfair treatment?" A ripple of tension moved through the audience. Meghan inhaled deeply. "Legal strategies are complex, Tamron. Sometimes pursuing litigation can be emotionally draining and distract from more meaningful work. It's about prioritizing what really matters." Tamron didn't blink. "But wouldn't vindication strengthen your message?" she asked. "If the media truly misrepresented you, wouldn't proving that in court reinforce your credibility, especially for the humanitarian work you want people to focus on?" The studio fell completely silent. Cameras zoomed in, catching every subtle shift in Meghan's expression. Her response came slower this time. "You're oversimplifying a very complicated situation," she said carefully. "When you're dealing with a media landscape that profits from controversy and conflict, the truth often gets buried beneath the headlines." Tamron folded her hands. "Fair point," she said. "But critics might argue that your team has used those same headlines strategically to shape narratives that favor your public image. How do you respond to that?" The question landed like a thunderclap. For the first time, Meghan's composure visibly wavered. Her smile faltered. Her eyes darted toward the camera, then back to Tamron. "Well," she said finally, her voice softer now, "I think the bigger question is why certain people are so invested in tearing others down when they try to do something positive." It was a practiced pivot, graceful, polished, but the room felt different now. The audience wasn't hearing the Duchess delivering sound bites. They were watching a skilled public figure being cornered by someone equally adept, and Tamron Hall wasn't done. "Intentions aside," she said evenly, "don't public figures, especially those who've built a platform around transparency, have a responsibility to face tough questions?" The silence that followed was deafening. Even the studio crew seemed to sense they were witnessing more than an interview. They were witnessing a reckoning, one where royal polish met journalistic steel, and every word carried the weight of truth, perception, and power. Sometimes, Meghan said, her tone controlled but weary, the most powerful response is to rise above the noise and focus on substance. Tamron Hall leaned in slightly, her journalist's instinct alive behind calm, assessing eyes. I appreciate that, she replied evenly. But let's look at a few specifics. She glanced down at her notes. Last year, your spokesperson dismissed a story about your alleged conflict with palace staff as categorically false. Yet, when asked for clarification about what was false, no details were ever provided. How do you expect the public to distinguish between unfair attacks and legitimate criticism when your team's responses are so often vague? The question hit like lightning. Meghan's practiced smile faltered Mindum, and this time it didn't return. She sat a little straighter, eyes narrowing slightly as she realized this wasn't going to be the polished, PR-friendly segment she'd anticipated. I find it concerning, she began, her tone sharpening, that you're essentially asking me to relitigate every story written about me in the past few years. That's not why I'm here, and frankly, it's not productive for anyone. Tamron didn't flinch. Actually, she said, voice still smooth, I think it is productive. Because when public figures speak about media accountability, people deserve to know what that means and in practice. She flipped a page in her notes with deliberate precision. The faint whips of paper seemed to slice through the silence. Let's talk about something you've often mentioned, speaking your truth. That's become something of a signature phrase for you. But truth by definition isn't subjective. Either something happened or it didn't. Either someone said something or they didn't. So when you say my truth, are you acknowledging that your version of events might differ from documented facts? A faint tightening in Meghan's jaw. The cameras caught it instantly. I think you're playing word games, Tamron, Meghan replied, her voice cool but tense. When people share their lived experiences, those experiences are valid, regardless of how others choose to interpret or report them. But interpretation and reporting are not the same, Tamron countered, her tone quick and precise. Reporting involves verifying what actually occurred. So when multiple independent sources confirm information that contradicts your public statements, how do you reconcile that difference? The studio fell completely silent. Even the audience, which had been politely engaged moments earlier, seemed to hold its collective breath. From the front row, Meghan's publicist fidgeted, glancing nervously toward the producers. The tension was becoming unbearable. I think what you're doing right now, Meghan said finally, her voice rising, is exactly the problem. You're reducing complex human situations to a courtroom-style interrogation. That's not journalism. That's ambush tactics. Tamron raised an eyebrow. That subtle, unmistakable look that her longtime viewers recognized immediately. Ambush tactics, she repeated softly. Meghan, these are your own public statements, supported by public records. If asking you to clarify inconsistencies in your own narrative feels like an ambush, what does that say about the narrative itself? A murmur ran through the audience. Meghan's hands, once resting gracefully in her lap, now gripped the arms of her chair so tightly her knuckles turned white. Beneath the studio lights, a flush crept across her face. You know what, Tamron? She said, the calm veneer cracking. I came here in good faith, to talk about real issues, real people, and meaningful work. But you seem more interested in tabloid-style gotcha journalism than in having an actual conversation. Tamron's tone remained composed, almost disarmingly. So, then let's talk about issues that matter, she said smoothly. Your foundation received significant donations from several high-profile individuals and corporations. Yet, according to public records, nearly 60% of those funds went to administrative costs in the first year. Can you explain to viewers why such a large portion of charitable contributions went to overhead, rather than direct aid? The question landed like a bombshell. Meghan froze, her mouth opening slightly, then closing again as she scrambled for footing. The poise that had carried her through countless interviews seemed to waver under the weight of the data Tamron had just dropped. Those figures, she began, her words faltering. That's not... You're taking financial reports out of context. Her usual eloquence deserted her. For the first time, the cameras captured not the composed Duchess, but a woman caught completely off guard. Tamron didn't interrupt. She didn't need to. The silence did the work for her, and in that silence the tension became almost unbearable. A single live moment where the power dynamics flipped entirely. Starting a foundation, Meghan said tightly, requires significant infrastructure investment. You can't just write checks and call it charity work. Of course not, Tamron replied, her voice measured but unyielding. But 60% in administrative costs is more than double the industry standard. The American Institute of Philanthropy recommends keeping those expenses below 25%. So, can you explain what specific infrastructure investments justified such a high percentage? A visible flicker of panic crossed Meghan's face. Her breathing quickened and her eyes darted toward her publicist, a silent plea for rescue that never came. I'm not going to sit here and defend every financial decision, she snapped, to someone who clearly came into this interview with a predetermined agenda to make me look bad. Tamron's response was calm, her tone cutting through the air like glass. My agenda is simple, to ask the questions responsible journalism demands. When public figures seek to influence opinion and solicit public donations, scrutiny isn't hostility. It's accountability. The words hung between them like a gauntlet. For the first time, Meghan's carefully composed image seemed to fracture, the mask of media training slipping under the weight of real, unfiltered confrontation. This is exactly what I mean about toxic media culture, Meghan shot back, her voice rising. You're not interested in understanding context. You're here to create conflict, to turn complex issues into entertainment. Tamron leaned back slightly, her professionalism unshaken. Asking public figures to explain their own statements and account for how they spend public funds isn't toxic, Meghan. It's journalism. The fact that you view basic accountability as an attack, well, some viewers might find that troubling. Behind the cameras, the production team worked furiously. Wide shots, close-ups, reaction angles, capturing what had become live television gold. The tension in the studio was electric, almost unbearable. And then it broke. Meghan stood abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the studio floor. The sudden movement startled the crew and sent a murmur rippling through the audience. You know what? She said, voice shaking with anger. I don't have to sit here and be subjected to this kind of hostile interrogation disguised as journalism. Tamron remained seated, her expression composed, her authority filling the silence. Please sit down, Meghan. We're live on air. Walking away from legitimate questions doesn't make them disappear. It only makes people wonder what you're trying to hide. Hide? Meghan repeated, incredulous. Her voice cracked, the polished tone gone. I'm not hiding anything. I'm refusing to participate in a character assassination masquerading as an interview. This isn't journalism, Tamron. It's a hit job. The audience sat frozen, stunned. A few phones lifted discreetly, recording the moment everyone instinctively knew would go viral before the night was over. At the edge of the set, Meghan's publicist stood, frantically signaling the control room, desperate for someone to cut to commercial. But Tamron's voice carried on, steady and devastatingly calm. A hit job would mean making false accusations or asking inappropriate questions. I've done neither. I've asked you to clarify your own statements, explain discrepancies, and account for charitable funds. If that feels like character assassination, Meghan. She paused just long enough for the words to land. Then, perhaps the real issue isn't the questions. It's your relationship with transparency. Meghan's composure shattered. She raised her hand sharply, pointing a finger at Tamron, a gesture that looked almost like a warning under the hot studio lights. Stop it, she snapped. Enough. Just stop, Meghan snapped, her voice trembling with fury. Stop with your sanctimonious lecture about journalism and accountability. You ambushed me with financial records taken out of context, twisted my words, and created a hostile environment designed to make me look bad no matter how I responded. Tamron rose slowly, matching Meghan's height but not her heat, her composure intact even as her guest visibly unraveled under the studio lights. Meghan, she said evenly, the financial records I referenced are public documents, part of your foundation's official filings. The quotes I cited came from your own interviews and verified social posts. Nothing has been taken out of context. I'm asking you to explain them. Explain them to who? Meghan fired back, her voice so loud the studio microphones began to distort. To you? To an audience that's already made up its mind after years of biased coverage? Or to a media machine that profits from tearing down successful women, especially women of color, who dare to challenge the status quo? The line landed heavy, the race card, and everyone knew it. Tamron's expression hardened just slightly, a warning. Don't, she said quietly, her tone carrying the weight of lived experience. Don't you dare hide behind identity politics when you're being asked legitimate questions. I know discrimination. I've fought it my entire career, but I've never used it as a shield to avoid accountability. You don't get to weaponize it because the questions make you uncomfortable. Meghan's face flushed, anger and humiliation colliding. How dare you lecture me about discrimination? She spat. You have no idea what I've been through, what my family has endured, because of relentless media persecution. Then explain it, Tamron countered, her patience thinning for the first time all night. Give examples. Name the false stories. Provide evidence. That's what accountability looks like. That's what transparency means. The challenge hit like a gauntlet thrown across the studio floor. Meghan froze, her mouth opening, then closing. Nothing came out. The silence stretched, taut and unbearable. The only sound was the low hum of the studio lights and the collective breath of an audience that knew they were watching something historic. This is insane, Meghan finally said, her voice cracking, the fight draining from her. I came here to talk about helping people, about making a difference. You've turned it into a courtroom interrogation. You came here, Tamron said firmly, as a public figure asking for public trust and public donations. The public has a right to know that their support is being used responsibly. That's not persecution, Meghan. That's citizenship. Something inside Meghan broke. She began backing away toward the edge of the set, her movements awkward, uncertain. I'm done, she said sharply. I'm absolutely done with this. Air whatever you want. Edit it however serves your narrative. But I won't be part of my own public execution. There's no editing in live television, Tamron replied calmly. What viewers see is what's happening. Your words, your reactions, your defensiveness. That's not editing. That's reality. The words hit like blows. Meghan turned to her publicist, who was already on her feet, motioning frantically toward the control room. We're leaving, right now. This interview is over. Tamron's voice followed her, calm and unshakable. You can walk away, Meghan, she said, but you can't walk away from the questions. They'll still be there tomorrow, and viewers will remember how you chose to handle them tonight. Meghan spun back one last time, face flushed, voice raw. You know what they'll remember, Tamron? They'll remember that you ambushed a guest who came here in good faith, that you turned substance into spectacle, that you proved exactly why people don't trust mainstream media anymore. Tamron didn't flinch. Her final words were delivered with devastating precision. What they'll remember, she said, is that when asked to account for your words and your foundation's finances, you chose to storm off instead of answer. That will speak louder than any accusation you make about my journalism. Meghan's eyes flashed. Fury, hurt, disbelief, before she turned and strode off the set, heels echoing against the studio floor. Her publicist hurried after her, headset dangling, as the cameras tracked their retreat until the curtains swallowed them from view. Tamron stood alone in the silence that followed, the air electric with what had just unfolded. Then she turned to face the camera, posture straight, tone unwavering. When we return, she said, we'll discuss media accountability and why asking tough questions matters even when the answers are uncomfortable. Don't go anywhere. The broadcast cut to commercial as the studio erupted into a low buzz, crew whispering, audience members scrolling furiously through their phones. Tamron Hall had done what few journalists ever manage, cut through years of image management and PR polish, forcing a reckoning her guest wasn't ready for. By morning, the clip would dominate headlines and timelines alike. But in that moment, before the edits, the spin and the outrage, and when the truth had stood alone, raw and undeniable in front of a live studio audience,